Okay, so I want to talk about this while it's fresh, because the debate has just ended, the BBC debate, BBC One, I believe it was, on the Tory leadership race, prime ministerial race. I haven't taken as many notes as I did last time, partly because, frankly, I couldn't be bothered to, and secondly, because I ran out of space the last time, so I thought I'd just focus on listening to this one. Nevertheless, there are a number of talking points around it. It was presented by Emily Maitlis, and of course, Dominic Raab wasn't in this one. He was eliminated earlier today. Now, the first thing I'll say, the first noticeable thing, incidentally, if you didn't watch this, it was a different format from the other one in that the five men remaining were sitting on chairs. Emily Maitlis was at the podium, and they were taking questions from around the country by video link. The BBC had asked people to submit questions. I submitted a question on how they would deal with China, and that wasn't brought up. But nothing really similar was brought up about how we interact with other powers around the world. I'm a bit disappointed with that. Having said that, you can only fit so much into like a 1 hour situation. So I do hope more on foreign policy comes up though in the upcoming debates. It's a very important area. So far, the entire focus has been on Brexit and domestic issues, important as they are. I believe foreign policy is also very important. Once again, it didn't really come up. Um, what I did notice though was there was sort of a bit of ganging up on Stewart, or rather, targeting of Stewart, not Johnson. I would have thought the candidates would kind of be having a go at Johnson, partly because he didn't turn up last time. Actually, the focus was on Stewart. Now, perhaps the reason for this is they think, oh, this guy is actually a bit of a threat. You know, a few weeks ago, probably no one would have expected Stewart to still be in at this stage. So it was pretty obvious. Hunt at one point was clearly quite annoyed. I think one thing with Stewart, I like the guy, but I do think he's starting to come across as a little bit almost. I don't think this is deliberate, but smug. What I mean by that is he's constantly saying we need to regain trust, we need to regain trust. So he's essentially saying that his colleagues are not trustworthy. And I think that was starting to show through. Jeremy Hunt was visibly quite annoyed by that, and so were the others. And I think it was palpable that they were trying to target Stuart tonight. So that's an obvious thing. So they had this format of people. Some of them were Tories, but it was a mixture of people from around the country. A few people who had voted for the Brexit Party. How can they regain trust in the Tory party? So I guess this is where Stuart's pitch is valid. Um, Another problem though with Stuart, since I'll just say this in observation, it's important to what he is doing, saying we need to tell it to you straight. That's how you regain trust. The problem with Stuart's pitch is it's coming across as a little bit pessimistic. I think I mean, I know what he's saying. It shouldn't all be about machismo and about making false promises, misleading promises. But the Stuart campaign to me is coming across as a little bit negative, a little bit cynical, like, oh, we can't promise this, so we won't. I mean, it's adult, it's mature, it's true. You cannot promise things. On the other hand, I think he needs to be a little bit more grand, frankly. He needs to be a little bit more ambitious because people do respond to that. The other candidates are, Stuart is not, so that may be his Achilles heel. I think you could be honest, be direct with people, but also say you're ambitious. Say that you believe in this country, that you believe great things could be done. I think Stuart's coming across as a little bit negative. So that's just something I've noticed. Um, so I'm going to touch on a few of these questions. One thing that comes to mind, this is in no particular order. There was an imam from Bristol, and the first question inevitably went to Boris Johnson, and it was about Islamophobia, alleged Islamophobia in the Tory party. What Johnson done was immediately got into the fact that his grandfather was a Muslim from the Ottoman Empire, came to this country. He also put it that when this issue of Nazanin, the British Iranian woman who's currently incarcerated there, came up, Emily Maitlis said she was quoting the Imam's direct question, which was, "Do words have consequences?" The Imam was concerned about what he saw as rising Islamophobia. Johnson retorted that no British politician and Britain itself should not be blamed for the behaviour of the Iranian regime. Now, I agree with that. Johnson has got a lot of heat for his comments in the Nazanin case, and I think he could probably have done that better. However, there is a fundamental truth that it is the Iranian regime that is incarcerating this woman for absolutely no plausible reason, with no evidence of her alleged spying. It is the Iranian regime that is doing this. And I think Johnson was right in that sense that by constantly putting the focus on him, it's kind of taking the focus off what Iran is actually doing, and taking the focus off Iran. Now, this man in Bristol, he's an imam, so I knew almost immediately it was going to be that question. Sajid Javid called for an inquiry, an internal inquiry, and he asked his colleagues, "Would you agree to this?" And they unanimously did. Um, is it a valid question? Well, if there is allegations that there is I don't like the term Islamophobia. I've said this in previous videos. I think it's a way to silence legitimate criticism of Islamic extremism. However, I do recognize anti-Muslim bigotry. There are hate groups out there, and um, you know, they will target Muslims. There is definitely a situation of anti Muslim bigotry in society, whilst there's also a situation of Islamic extremism. I felt that the responses were a little bit too much going in terms of just what the Imam wanted to hear, which was, yes, this is terrible and we'll do something about it. That's valid. But I think there should have been a bit more of a caveat of, yes, we need to recognize and condemn anti Muslim bigotry, but we also need to recognize there's a problem with Islamic extremism. I wonder what that Imam's view on that is. Would he recognize that there is a problem with Islamic extremism, or will he, like many Islamist apologists, and this is a question, I'm not saying this is his position, but would he say, oh, it's got nothing to do with Islam? None of the candidates really made that caveat, so I was disappointed with that. It was a bit too PC for my liking, frankly. Yes, there's a problem with anti-Muslim bigotry, but there needs to be a caveat. There is also a very serious problem with Islamic extremism, and we've had a series of deadly terrorist attacks proving it. All the candidates were a bit PC on that. I wasn't overly impressed. Although Michael Gove did point out that there is also an anti-Semitism problem in Corbyn's Labour. Gove was the most vocal against Jeremy Corbyn. In fact, he got in one line regarding a question about a general election. A man put it to them, there will be 120,000 Conservative members voting for them, not the vast majority of the public. Gove's, they all refuted that there should be a general election. Hunt said no general election until Brexit is delivered. Rory Stewart kept to his pitch, no general election until we restore trust, which I think was not a great answer. Gove said, let's put away this discredited Marxists. So they really put that, they all reject the idea of a general election. Well, they would say that. I mean, no ruling party is ever going to say, be overly enthusiastic about a general election. Um, Emily Maitlis put it to Boris Johnson that he had criticised Gordon Brown for being a kind of coronated prime minister. Now, the fact of the matter is, whichever Leaves men win, they will be the second prime minister in a row who hasn't been elected from a general election. Yes, the Conservatives are the party that won in 2017, but whichever of these men win, they will be the second prime minister after Theresa May to be, become prime minister internally. Now, our system doesn't elect prime ministers directly. That is our system. Nevertheless, I do think it's damaging in terms of public confidence. It tends to be that prime ministers who last longer tend to be those who have come in from general elections. Theresa May wasn't directly elected. I mean, she just succeeded to the role, from an internal party contest, rather than as a winner of a general election. And she only lasted 3 years. Gordon Brown only lasted 3 years. So, maybe they should learn from history in that regard. But then again, Theresa May did call the election, and Tory suffered big losses there. So there's different ways to look at that. A 15-year-old girl from Glasgow asked about the climate change, and she was one of the youth sort of activists. Well, all the candidates made the pitch of, we need to do more for the environment. Gove said he'd spoken to Greta Thunberg. Um, and the girl was asked, "Are you impressed?" And she was like, "No, none of you have given the answer I wanted." Yeah, but this is the problem. These youth activists are idealistic. You know, they feel that they're doing something great to change the world, but the demand is simply unrealistic. I think it's something like they want zero emissions by 2025. That is just not plausible. It's just not realistic. And so, this is to me a case of a young woman, young person. Just, I remember when I was 17, I wanted to change the world. It's youthful zeal. And, she was going to say that whatever the candidate said. I think even if they gave her the answer she wanted, she would have said, "Oh, they haven't given me the answer," because she's on TV. It gives her the moment to, win support from her revolutionary little friends. I'm afraid I'm a bit cynical about it, simply because I'm not that old myself. I'm 33. I remember when I was that age. The idea that this is the thing I would just point out though. All these people asking questions, and this is the same in general election debates. They need to understand they're actually in a position of privilege, getting to ask questions. I mean, the ideas are across party of society, but it's a privileged position, and some of them are, I think, kind of that it get a little bit in their head. Oh, it's my 15 minutes of fame. No, they haven't given the answer I wanted. It's a bit, I don't know. I just feel it's a little bit. Although one man who had said he'd switched to the Brexit Party did vocally credit Jeremy Hunt. He said Jeremy Hunt's the only person that has given me that answer, and he attacked Rory Stewart for avoiding the question, for avoiding the answer. So that was interesting. Um, I didn't, yeah, I didn't really make any other notes. Criticism of this format. Well, I think Emily Maitlis done a pretty good job, given the tasks that she had. She clearly done her homework on what candidates had said in the past as relevant to the questions. She, pushed them to stick to the questions. So I've no critique of her as a host, as the questioner. The format felt a little messy. Too often they were just shouting over one another. For example, a guy from Belfast, as he was waiting to ask his question, Emily Maitlis had to say, "Gentlemen, just let him ask the question." So there was a few points where it was a bit noisy and chaotic. Incidentally, the guy from Belfast was asking about the border issue, and all the candidates were stressed how important that was. Um, Michael Gove was asked about his relationship with Irish leaders. He refuted that he had a negative relationship. Sajid Javid pointed out that as Home Secretary, he knows just how hard the peace process in Northern Ireland was. Gove said he was somewhat critical of some of the approaches that Tony Blair took in the peace process. Um, I'm pleased they did include a question from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is still part of the United Kingdom, and I'm pleased that was included. Um, I should say, by the way, talking of members of the public asking questions, there was a woman at the start who, I believe, she said that her husband, she was concerned about a no deal Brexit, and she also said that none of the candidates gave a reassurance. Although Rory Stewart was very quick to point out that we cannot have a no deal, the others were very, assertive about we have to have Brexit. Um, I think it's obvious none of the candidates want a no deal, even Boris Johnson. Um, I don't want a no deal, but I can definitely see why it's a hard selling point. I know Stuart wants to be direct, but it is going to be a hard selling point for a Tory leader to say we're not leaving for the third time on the date that's is stated. So anyway, it was an interesting debate. Valid questions were brought up. like I say, I had a few contentions. That question on Islamophobia, I want to see the candidates, whoever becomes prime minister. I hope they will not shy away from being very vocal about the threat of Islamic extremism and other extremes. Today, several national action psychopaths, terrorists, were jailed, and rightly so. National Action is a vile group. Incidentally, Jeremy Hunt pointed out that he has children who are mixed race, so he knows that they stand out. But we are also one of the most tolerant countries in the world. I think that's true. I think we are one of the most tolerant countries in the world. But there are extremes on the rise: Islamic extremism, far right extremism. A prime ministerial candidate has to be very vocal about all extremes. Now, my issue with the Islamophobia thing is that there's frankly too much political correctness about it. Yes, people need to be responsible in what they say. Yes, Boris Johnson maybe could have worded the burqa thing better, but the left got obsessed about that, and they're losing sight of the fact there is actually an integration thing here. The burqa should not be welcomed in this country. It's all very well doing the PC thing. Oh, we're very tolerant, we're very diverse, but there's some very, very real issues going on in society here regarding integration. And the way I think that you um, solve or at least tackle the divisions in society is about being honest. I don't think you tackle these things by pretending that they don't exist, by pretending that there aren't problems with integration. So they were basically giving the imam the answers he wanted to hear, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm not against the idea of an investigation internally in the Tory party if there is real examples of anti-Muslim bigotry. But if it's a case that Tory MPs or others are raising concerns about Islamic extremism, I would have liked to see these candidates say very clearly, let's not conflate criticism of Islamic extremism with anti-Muslim bigotry, because it's not the same thing. And none of them done that. So I was disappointed by that, but not overly surprised. There's very, very, very few politicians in Britain today who are willing to really be vocal about Islamic extremism. And sadly, those who are immediately denounced as far right. It's really, really frustrating. Anyway, it was worth watching. I hope they upload it online. Check it out. My only critique, really, in terms of the format, was it was a bit messy. I don't mind the idea, the concept of getting a cross section of society to ask questions in that way. I think that's okay. And there were a variety of questions, to be fair. I would have liked to hear more on foreign policy, but I accept that you can't put everything into the slot. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other questions people would have liked to hear. Um, it was a little messy, but overall, did a winner come out? Not really. Johnson is still comfortably ahead. I think probably this was the candidate that's trying to push Stewart out of the race. Whether that works or not remains to be seen. Whether these debates have any influence on their parliamentary colleagues or Tory members, I don't know. I mean, no one's done this sort of analysis like they do with the American news networks of a post-mortem after the debate of people who are undecided or something like that. I think what they should do is get like a studio of Tory voters, Tory members, and get them to say who they thought came out on top. It would be a good sort of indicator of the way, if these debates are making any difference at all. Maybe they're making no difference. So that would be an interesting thing.